I think of the life of a miner who must work all his day underground, where his lamplight is all that will shine there, and it's dark and it's damp all around. It is 2 or 3 miles to the coal face, and the tunnel is jagged and low, but he cannot find work on the surface, so it's down in the mines he must go.
And you're very welcome back to the Urigna Mining Experience as we continue on with our interviews with people who would have worked in the mines, and indeed, in the next case, somebody who would have worked in the power station in Urigna for many years. Paul Kelly, you're very welcome here to the Urigna Mining Experience, originally from Monastraden in County Sligo. And your journey to Urigna power station and working with the ESB started as an apprentice, Paul. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, John, in October 1968, I can remember the date, it's the 14th of October 1968, I started in Urigna Power Station as an electrical apprentice. And I had no transport from my home. My father organised a lift down with me with a man in a Morris Minor who was working with the ESB Rural Electrification. They were doing places like Dower and Glengevlin, some parts down there who hadn't got the electricity into their houses earlier in the first rural electrification scheme. And this man brought me down as far as the Tinker's Turn over near Drumshanbo, and he stopped his car there, and he had a few other workers with him, and he stopped, he blocked another car that was coming along, PJ O'Malley, and he asked PJ, would you bring this young man down to Urigna Power Station? No mobile phones, anything like that then, so I had no digs organised or anything, so I had my little suitcase with me and down to the power station. And as a little young country boy, to go into the power station and all the noise and the sound and all that was going on in it, it was, the eyes were outside my head watching it, just in awe of all this. And that was my first taste of Urigna Power Station. And I was very lucky because some of the people who were there working at the time, Sean McMorran, I would have lived in Keeger. Sean was the senior electrician there. And Sean would have taken me in hand and would have organised digs for me and a place to stay. And he organised a place in Keeger with Joe and Patsy Guihan, who were originally from Urigna, who had worked in England for years and had come back. So I stayed with Patsy and Joe for about 4 years, and they were lovely people. Great people to stay with, very decent.
So your first impression of Urigna, Keejo, Kilronan Parish, Drumshanbo, the surrounding areas, a welcoming community?
Very welcoming, yeah. And it was a big change for me, John, to come down there and no communication with home, no ways of travelling. I was depending solely on the good nature of people and the goodness of people for a lift to work every morning and home at the evenings. And when I'd go home at the weekend, maybe on a Friday evening or that, you'd always be looking for a lift home as well,
Yeah.
But people were very
whereas
good.
Monastraden wasn't too far away from Keejo,
No.
at the same time, when looking for transport and looking to try and get from A to B, it was difficult enough.
It was, John, yeah, it was. And that time, I started off, we'll say, the digs were, I was paying more for my digs than I was earning as an apprentice for the first 6 months, Yeah. But the digs were very reasonable at the time, but it was much, the wages I was getting were very little, compared. But that was good because after about in January the following January, I started my block release course. That time we did 3 months every year with what was called a block release course as an apprentice. You did 5 years apprenticeship. And my first course was in Carlow for 3 months and in real cold, hard weather. And I'll never forget it because the landlady, she was a nice lady, but after 6 o'clock in the evening, you didn't get anything to eat. You got no supper. And mind you, for a young fella, 17 years of age, you'd be fairly hungry at 10 o'clock at night,
And would you be finished the course in time to get back for last orders?
Well, you would, yeah.
You would, yeah.
We were the first group of students into the new Institute of Technology College in Carlow at that time. But when the 3 months were over, then I came back to Urigna. So I spent my 5 years then doing my apprenticeship in Arigna and sometime in other power stations. What you would do, you might go to other stations on an overhaul where there might be a maintenance carried out, maybe a power station might be shut down for 2 months while they were doing overhaul work on the different electrical equipment and mechanical equipment as well, but I would be involved with electrical equipment, you know.
Yeah. And the whole education ethos in the apprenticeship and the training ethos in it, that stuck to you well after the power station, but initially you came back working full-time then on Arigna.
Oh yes. Well, you see, you had your exams to do then, you know. You had exams every year you had to do, but then when you finish your apprenticeship, you had your final exams, which were senior trades exams, and you had to do them, and you had to pass them if you wanted to be kept on as with DSP, if you had to have a chance of being kept on, you know. So I spent my 5 years apprenticeship, and then I had to do 2 years after that before I was finally employed fully by DSP.
By DSP. At that stage then, obviously you were deciding that Keiju was going to be home.
Yeah, well, I had spent to about 3 years in Drumshanbo as well. I had moved into Drumshanbo and stayed in there in an apartment of my own for a couple of years as well before I met Margaret, and we eventually bought a small little house in Keiju beside Porrick Noon and Kathleen, and we had to do all that up and that type of thing, you know.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of money on it over the years, you know.
And everything moved on from there. What was life like working in the power station, say, from the 70s, 80s, right up until the close down to the mid-90s?
Well, when I went down there first, John, the power station was very new. It had been commissioned, we'll say, in 1958, and I was there in 68, so it was very new. It was like a new car, and everything was in good shape, and everything was working well. And the quality of the coal then was very good as well. The quality of the coal from Arigna then at that stage was very, very good. And I suppose you could say as well that time, like when Arigna Power Station was built, it created a huge amount of extra employment in the mines and in the whole area.
It was the main outlet for coal to go
Well,
to.
it was, yeah, because during the war in Arigna, most of the coal was being supplied maybe to Dublin and to the hospitals, different hospitals around. Yeah. Coal was the main fuel for the heating in all these hospitals, that type of thing. And when Arigna Power Station was on, that gave a new impetus to the whole mining industry in this area, you know, and created a huge amount of work.
Would it be right in saying, as the years went on, maybe the job got more difficult in the sense that the quality of coal mightn't have been as good and the equipment was getting older?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. John, you see, the coal, as it came into the power station, every load that came in had to be tested. Well, they would take samples from it, the chemical staff down there, the people in the laboratory, and they would test the coal and they would check it out for the levels of ash, high ash content or low ash content. And that's how the coal suppliers were paid, by the content of ash. If there was too much high ash in it, like that was, they weren't going to get as good a price, you know. Right. And you see, as the years went by, then you see the quality of the coal was disimproved, we'll say, with the result that they had to start using oil to help to burn it in the boiler down there in the power station, you know. And also later on then, as the coal even went down lower, they started using some of the crow coal. You know, the stocks were dying out, like they weren't just there. So they were using some of the crow coal, and they had to use oil, but they also started bringing up some stuff from Sligo, from the docks, you know, that they would mix.
To mix in with it.
Yeah.
So it became more and more less viable.
It did, John.
To burn it.
Along with that, then you see the equipment, the plant, we'll say the turbine. There had been a few problems over the years with the turbine where there had maybe developed little cracks in the turbine. Now, the turbine was a very dangerous piece of equipment because you had a rotor running in that at 3,000 revs per minute, high speed, and there couldn't be any cracks in any of the cover that was on that. So at once or twice they had to get in specialists to repair cracks that had come in it. So that was one aspect. Also, in other areas, the boiler itself, they were constantly maybe having to replace boiler tubes, this type of things like that, you know, that were just wearing out, you know.
That was all taking place, and we've heard from other interviews as well, the whole process and the whole rumour mill was circulating that, the future of the mines could be in doubt, the future of the power station could be in doubt. Yet on the other hand, there was hopes maybe that a new power station to burn the crock oil could be built as well. So was there, I suppose, from many ways for people that would be working in the mines and working in the power station, there was an era of uncertainty there at that time, Paul.
Well, there was, John. Yeah, later on there was. Yeah, in the late 80s and that there would. We knew we had a fair idea it's going to close. But you see, at one stage there, you see that there was a big chance, a big hope, and it was more or less going to go ahead that there was going to be a new power station built with what was called a fluidized bed. This was going to use the croak coal, but it would be open cast mining. And that was, they had the land bought down at the power station. They had Jim Keenan's land, farm of land, most of it bought for the new site. But and they had also done a lot of work out in the lake to see for depths, measuring the depth of the lake and all that type of thing. But Money Point came on then, it was built then, and that more or less shelved Rigna.
And do you feel it was political influence that got it moved to Money Point as opposed
yeah,
to
I would be of the opinion that it did have a bit of an impact on it, all right, because the PDs, I think that time went in along with Fianna Fáil, and Desi O'Malley was from down that part of the world, that part of the country, and he would have had a big. But Money Point was a massive station, massive station. Like whereas Rigna, it would have given 40 years of. There was enough coal, I think, croak coal to supply it for 40 years if they had gone ahead with that. You know.
Talk to me about the contrast, Paul, and maybe working in the power station. And you eloquently described it when you arrived first, the noise and the hustle and the bustle. But at the same time, if you came out of it, you were on one of the most tranquil settings on the shores of Lough Allen.
Absolutely beautiful, John. Absolutely. And it was a beautiful, to work down there beside the lake. Like at lunchtime, I always used to go over, there was a big ash ponds there, where the ash from the coal that was burnt. But every lunchtime I used to walk over along that shore. Most days I'd walk along over that shore. It was beautiful, and it was lovely. And also, you see, there was warm water went out from the power station into that lake, and that was a place where some men, I know, there was 1 or 2 men used to go fishing there at lunchtime, and they'd often maybe get 6, 7 or 8 perch.
The fish would be coming into the warm water.
They were there in the warm water,
Amazing story on it. Life in Keiju at that stage as well. I know you had a big part with the Doka GA club, moving from Modest Drayton. You were an accomplished footballer when you came here. You played underage at Sligo at county level.
I did. I played minor, I did, 69. And that Sligo minor team in 68 got to the All-Ireland final, but I wasn't good enough. I didn't make the panel, but I got a few trials, all right, but I wasn't good enough that year,
But you were there in 69?
I was, yeah.
And what was the GA a big help in maybe settling into a different community then when you came?
Well, they were actually, St. Rona's had a very good minor team then, actually. They got to the county final around 68 or 69, 68 or 69, they did, with a very good team. They were beaten, I think, by Castlereagh, I think, in the county final, they had a good team. Right. Peter Daly was a guard in Keach at the time. I think he was involved with them. They were, Then later on, you had Dan Kane. See, the guards that time were around, you had guards in the barracks in Keach, and they were all nearly well involved with the GA.
With GA,
They were good men to be involved with as well.
And would have played huge roles in the GA clubs as well.
They did.
After the playing career ended, I know a few years down the line that you are heavily involved in coaching as well.
Well, I was, John, but I enjoyed it, and it was a great way of making friends, and it was a great
Good
time.
way of making a few enemies as well.
Well, but I made more friends. I hope I made more friends than enemies, And
absolutely.
they were all lovely fellas, and I still to this day, I'd love to meet them, They were all great lads, and my biggest regret is that they didn't win something more than they did, And like you were the man who brought success with that great minor title. But
we were all part of that management team, and you had great work done for many years leading into it. The GA and the power station, you had obviously you were from Sligo. You had a great rivalry as well with Roscommon and Leitrim and fellas maybe from different parts of the country. Was GAA the big topic of conversation at break times?
It would have been, John, but you know, at that time there was an inter-firms competition as well. Well, no, it was an interstation competition between all the different power stations.
And Arigna had a team.
No, we didn't. We played with Carrick and Shannon.
With Carrick and Shannon.
Carrick and Shannon, Arigna, and then there were lads from Sligo, different places. We all played. We had you had lads from the district and lads from the power station played together. Right. Actually, there was a lad from Donegal. He was a Joe Winston. I think he could have played with Donegal at some stage. He played with us as a member as well. Okay. But before my time, they had won the All Ireland competition in the Sligo district team had. Yeah. That would have included Sean Mead. Actually, remember Sean Mead that played with Galway? Yes. He worked in Arigna before my time. He had left just before I arrived. Yeah.
Okay.
Sean was.
So there was some household footballers in it. Yeah. Talk to me after 1990, Paul, and when the mines closed. Inevitably, the power station was going to close down shortly afterwards. Went for a couple of years after it. What was that like at the time? Because a lot of fellows would have been transferred to Lanesborough and different power stations like that. A lot of other fellows maybe that you worked with would have retired, taken redundancy, so on and so forth. So was that a difficult period, or had you your mind made up that you wanted to stay with the ESB and take on different roles?
Well, I suppose, John, you see, for a few years, the closure was going on there, and there were rallies held to try and keep it open and different things, you know, meeting politicians, and there was all that type of thing went on to try and hold it. But it was inevitable that it was going to close, and it was a worrying time for everybody. But there were a lot of people then who were quite content to take redundancy and move on, you know, older men, and were happy to get whatever they get, and that was the way it was at the power station. It was probably the same with a lot of the miners, you know. But I never considered leaving the ESB, no. And some fellas went to Lanesborough. Everybody, you know, we were all hoping we would get fixed up really well. And being an electrician, I was fortunate that I was able to get into Carrick and Shannon, which was beside me, you know.
And that was from the mid-90s, right up until you retired at the
That's
ESB.
right,
You stayed in that area.
It's a completely different type of work.
Yeah.
You know, completely different type. But I enjoyed Arigna. There was great men in it, wonderful men. You had men from Drumkeerdon, Arigna here itself, Tarman, Drumshambo, one or two from up past Kijo, up Drumboyle in that area, you know, and all great men. Like, you know, you'd have differences at times. There'd be a little bit of a conflict between fellas, but...
Which goes on in every workplace.
It was, yeah, but overall they were all great men.
Were these interviews, Paul, we talked about the beauty of Loch Allen and the walks and the routes that the miners would have gone through, were very much, I suppose, recording these interviews, and the walkers on these tracks will be benefiting from the legacy and the brainchild of Father Sean Tynan, who was a visionary when it came to it. He had this vision of putting in a miner's way. And what he did after the mines closed and after the power station closed to try and reinvent Arigna, Kilronan, the Drumshambo, the surrounding areas. He was parish priest in Kijo. You'd have known him well. You could maybe remember when he was setting up these walks and stuff. What memories would you have from that era, Paul? Maybe of what Father Tynan was involved in, and plays as well in Kijo.
Before I go to answer your question, I would have to say one of my big regrets about the Mining Museum and Arigna Power Station is that some part of Arigna Power Station wasn't kept here at the Mining Museum. That'd be part of the turbine or something like that, some part of it just to show what was done, you know. And also, I think it was a shame that DSB knocked the chimney stack.
That's right.
I think it was a shame because...
And that was only a couple of years before Here opened. I think that was knocked in 1999, and Here opened 3 or 4 years later.
That's right. And it was, I know, I was out in the lake with Father Tynan fishing. And mind you, when you went out with Father Tynan, you needed to bring your sandwiches with you because you weren't going to get into it.
It was a long day.
It was a long day. But that chimney stack was a great point of it was a great marker.
It was a landmark in the area.
For anybody that was out in the lake, it was wonderful. You knew where you were when you saw that. Now, I'll tell you a story about Father Tynan, just kind of when we were out in the lake one night. And that time, the famous Lahallan monster was in vogue, if you remember.
We've heard about him in one of the interviews here with Pius,
But anyway, I was out with Father Tynan one night, one evening, and we got hooked in what we thought was a big fish. But we followed this fish down towards Drumkeerdon, a good bit in the lake. And it was definitely the monster as far as Father Tynan was concerned. But,
It was dragging the boat down towards from here.
but eventually we realised it was a lump of a tree that we were hooked into. That was
And that, did you ever, you know, again, you'd hear various stories about the lake there, and you fished on it as well as working on the shores of it. Anything ever enchanted? Won't say a monster, but you often heard Loch Gallen be described as an enchanted lake.
no.
My mother lived on the shores of it, and she would always have sworn that in Greer.
Well, I can't say anything about being enchanted, Sean, but I know, John, that when the lake went down, we say when the levels were lowered, which happened, that was controlled from Ardnacrusha by DSB.
Yeah.
Sometimes during the summer you could walk off all out nearly on an island, off out nearly halfway.
Palmer's Island, wasn't it? You could walk in,
Yeah, you could walk out nearly into the middle of the Halland.
Yeah.
And I often did, like, you know, it was lovely to go out there, you know.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I couldn't ever have heard anything about it being enchanted, but
Right.
it's a beautiful lake now.
Your memories, I suppose, of community events taking place when in the 80s, early up until 1990, Kilrowan and Keeju, where you lived, Ballyfarnan, Drumshambo, neighbouring villages, like that. A vibrant community then, Paul. Big changes over the years, and probably to the detriment of the community aspect and all the businesses was the closure of the mines.
Yeah.
You could track it once the mines closed. A lot of businesses shut down in years after.
Well, they did. You take even Lynn's in Ballyfernan now. They had the sawmills come back, and they would have supplied a lot of timber and cut timber for maybe places that were maybe the mines or whatever. You know, I don't know how. I didn't know much about the mines, John, or how they cut their own timber for supports in the mines. You know, but Lynn's were cut their own trees and everything. There were supplying timber in the area. You know, but I can't really talk on that much now.
There was we heard from Charlie McGettigan, a former colleague of yours, and he mentioned about the rich music tradition that was around here, and there was a great acting tradition around here as well, with all the players. And Father Tynan was very prominent at that again. Kilronan players, you were part of some of those productions. I remember seeing on stage, I think, in the field, if memory serves me right, many moons ago. What was all that like?
Well, it was incredible, John, because Father Tynan got people to go up on the stage that never would have gone up on a stage. It was miraculous, and anybody that knew him would tell you that. Like, there were people that went up acting who never would have gone up on the stage. And I know myself personally, I always found it wonderful support after, if you had to do anything, speak in public or anything. It was great, that little bit of experience from having been on the stage with Father Tynan. He was an incredible man.
Yeah.
Incredible, you know.
We've talked about the Miners' Way. We've talked about the Rigna mining experience.
He was ahead of his time, John.
He was ahead of his time. In many ways, he'd probably be compared to, say, Monsignor Horan and Knock at the airport. And he would have been very much cut along the same cloth as someone with huge vision.
He would, yeah. And, you know, what he did at the miners' walks, like, he was way ahead of his time with all that, because now we see the way people just love all these walking. But along with that, John, you know, all these ancient altar sites and all that type of thing, and old megalithic tombs and famine graves, he was all into protecting them, and he did protect a lot of them, because you know yourself that forestry didn't have much respect for some of those sites. And I know that there was one instance where he prevented some of those sites from being damaged by forestry.
That's
know?
right. That's right.
I'm very careful here, aware that I don't want to say the wrong thing, too much of the wrong thing.
No, not at all. But you're right. It was an important aspect of what he did. Final question, Paul. You'd have seen probably from your involvement with the power station the type of work that went on in the mines and stuff. And it was difficult work, dangerous work by times maybe as well. Do you think the youth of today would be attracted to that type of life?
Unless it was necessary, John. It's not necessary now. And I have to say, you know, the people in Rigna, the finest young men died there very young. Great men. And I remember I used to stay in Joe and Patsy's. And if I came back early on a Sunday night, they'd bring me up to Flynn's in Rigna. And I was afraid of my life up there. Because you'd go in there, and I wasn't a pub, I used to have gone into a pub, but all these big, strong men, like, drinking pints, and, you know, a row of pints along the counter. And you could have these big horses of men, like bears of men, like you'd be afraid to look sideways at them. You'd get them. They might say something. They were lovely people, like. But you know, for me, like I didn't know anything about them, but they were all big, strong,
Physically
fine
imposing.
men. And you know, John, all those young men that died young then from that dust and lungs. So it was sad at the time, and it looked a terrible thing for the mines to close and all that. But now, when you look back, so many of those young men now, they've gone and got better education. They're going and getting university degrees and all this. And it's
a different life for
It's a
them.
different life.
Just to touch on that, the social aspect of it at that time and what was known as Flynn's Bar and the dance lounge and the bands that would be there on the Sunday night, the crowds were huge. The mines would be closed on a Monday, and it was a vibrant social scene at that stage.
You had McCrans, Tom Andy's, that you wouldn't know is there now.
Yeah.
Tom Andy's was packed Saturday night, Sunday night. McCrans the same, they'd all have bands there. And at work the next morning, they'd say, well, did you go to, where were you last night? Were you in McCrans or were you in Flynn's or were you in Tom Andy's? And,
Yes.
you know, there were three of them were booming. Then you had Drumkeeran. I don't know how many pubs were in Drumkeeran. All going well too. And you had three pubs, I think, in Keeger or four. Ballyferrin, they were all doing well. Now, but they all did well that time. It was a boom time, like. And where I came from, John, it was immigration. There was no employment. Like all my family, all immigrated. I was the first of my family to stay at home. They all had gone at 16 or 17 over to England, and they just had to go because there was nothing, you know.
Yeah, and that's probably what the mines saved so many families here locally. Yes, there was immigration in Arignan. I know people would have immigrated and gone to work in the buildings or whatever, but at least there was options there. There was
there was,
difficult work at home, but there was options to stay.
But sure, anybody would tell you that time in the Mayflower, the girls when they went to the Mayflower, John, all the fine young fellas from Arignan, well dressed, lots of money, they were the boys.
Yeah, they were the guys.
They were the guys, you know, yeah.
Well, look at Paul, some great memories. Thank you so much indeed for sharing them. It's great to hear some of the tales of the power station and your experience from there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, John.
Thanks a million.
I think of the life of the miner who must work all his day underground, where his lamplight is all that will shine there, and it's dark and it's damp all around. It is 2 or 3 miles to the coal face, and the tunnel is jagged and low, but he cannot find work on the surface, so it's down in the mines he must go.